Is Moses Atama boxing's next superstar? Now, Moses Atama is young, but he's already making waves. He's making waves in the heavyweight division. With explosive power and explosive confidence beyond his years, he's being fast-tracked as boxing's next big thing. Fans and promoters are calling him the future of heavyweight boxing. But is Moses Atama really destined to become sport's next superstar? Is he really destined? Is the hype legitimate? I would say the early implications is that the hype is more than legitimate. But let's look at Moses Atama's CV. When I use the term CV, I'm using it in a hyperbolic, metaphoric, creative way. I'm not talking about literally someone's CV. It's amazing that I have to explain that. But when I talk about Moses Atama's CV, I'm referring to the fights that he's had. So if you look at, let's give an example. If you look at Lennox Lewis's professional CV, you would see things such as undisputed heavyweight champion. So first he was, I think, the WBC champion. He lost it to Oliver McCall. Then he retained the WBC title from Oliver McCall. And then he became the undisputed champion. And then he made a sequence of defenses. That is a very impressive CV. Becoming a British champion is an impressive CV. Becoming a European champion is an impressive CV. Becoming a world title contender is impressive. But then when you become a champion and then you become an undisputed champion and then you develop into a legend, that's like the ultimate CV. But obviously Moses Atama is at the beginning. He's at the beginning stages of his career. So what does his CV look like? At the moment, I think there's three significant, there are three names on his record that we can speculate on. One of them is McLean. The next one is Mike Bellagone. And then the third one is his most popular fight, which was against Dillian Whyte. So McLean had a very competitive fight against Filip Hrgović. So the question would be, how good is Filip Hrgović? We don't know. There was a point where Filip Hrgović was being touted as a potential champion, but we know that I would say at this point, we would say that Filip Hrgović is a good fighter. He's a good fighter, and McLean had a good performance. Now, did Filip Hrgović underestimate McLean? That's possible. But he did have a good performance. It was a competitive fight, but he lost the fight and he was knocked out. But that to me would indicate that McLean came into the Moses Atama fight with ambition and with some credibility. And he was absolutely, well, it was just a first round knockout. I think it was a few feints, right hook, overhand left, and that was the end of that. So what does that tell us? It tells us that, Moses has great punching accuracy, great speed, and great power. Then we have the Mike Bellagone, and I was looking through his record, and he only has 2 losses. And clearly, when you look at Mike Bellagone, the way he came into the fight, he clearly came with ambition. Interestingly, in the first round, before he got knocked down, there was a battle of the jabs. And there's an interesting pattern here. McLean was a southpaw, and Mike Bellagone was a southpaw as well. And against Mike Bellagone, there was a battle of the jabs. And interestingly, Mike had a very fast jab, but Moses Atama handled that. He won the battle of the jabs, as you would expect. And then he caught him with a punch. I think it was like a 2-phased attack, and that caused the first knockdown. And then I believe the other knockdown was in round 2, where he launched a really beautiful counter shot. And that's another insight that we can make into Moses Atama. He does phased attack. So he might start off with the jab straight right, and then he'll do the jab and overhand left. The reason why I'm using the right hand for the jab is because Moses Atama is a southpaw. So he goes through the phases. He just doesn't do a 1-2 and then steps out and admire his work. He goes through the phases. Against Dillian Whyte, he went through 3 phases before he hurt him. So he goes through the phases. He also has a nice step back and counter. So if he steps back and you throw, he'll be in position to deliver a counter shot. So he'll do that half step back, and he's always in position to deliver that counter. So we've got a good jab. phased attacks, a nice step back to open up a potential counter. We've got a good body jab. And another thing I've noticed, a combination that he sometimes throws, is the jab to the body and then the straight left to the head. And he's very quick with that punch. It's very hard to read it because he's feinting, and then he'll throw it. It's hard to read it because of the feints, but also the speed and accuracy of the shot also make it difficult to deal with. Against Dillian Whyte, so against those two opponents, they were ambitious opponents that were southpaws. So we can see that he can destroy southpaws. Against Dillian Whyte, he went up against an experienced fighter with a very good left hook, a world-class left hook that can do significant damage. Just watch the Derek Chisora fight as a reference in terms of how significant that damage can be. And look at the Joseph Parker fight as a reference point. So Dillian Whyte not only had a really good left hook, but he's also been in with a wealth of great fighters, or a wealth of really good fighters. He's been in with Joseph Parker, he's been in with Tyson Fury, he's been in with Alexander Povetkin. He's fought at the highest level. And Moses Atama, respectively, he destroyed Dillian Whyte. Of course, there's context. There was the rumor now that there was a leg injury. But despite all of that, there was also a rumor that Moses Atama got knocked down. What happened to that rumor? But despite the rumors, what we saw was an absolutely blistering Moses Atama performance. So the other thing is, when you look at a fighter, is to look at their setup. And Moses Atama's trainer is Ben Davidson. Now, I know Ben Davidson gets a lot of criticism online, but clearly he's a high credible trainer. And I think what he brings to the table is that he studies his opponents meticulously from what I've gathered. He calls it a scout report. So he studies the positives and negatives of his opponents, and then he develops a strategy around that. So I think Moses Atama has a very good setup. He has a very strong setup. And like I said, all the implications, when you look at those last three performances, you would expect him to win those fights. But the manner in how he won those fights was, if it was a test paper, you'd given out A+ every time. So the implications is that Moses Atama, if he can take a punch, because we need to know if he can take a punch, if he is able to deal with adversity, and if his boxing intelligence enables him to solve the new puzzles that new opponents will bring him, then he definitely has the materials to be a superstar. He punches with the speed of a middleweight, has great footwork, has tremendous accuracy, and has a composure when he has a fighter hurt. He's meticulous with his punch selection, and all the implications will indicate that he can go very, very, very far. And like I said, if he can take a punch, and so if he has punch resilience to the head and body, and if he has that courage and character that all great champions must have, then he could potentially take over the division. He really could. He's really that good. I can't remember ever being so impressed with a boxer's raw talent. I can't remember being so impressed by a performance. Coming to mind, I remember when Lennox Lewis knocked out Razor Ruddock. That was a sensational performance. So that's a reference point. Another reference point is when he knocked out Golota. That was another sensational performance. But when he knocked out Golota, he was a seasoned fighter. I think he'd already been a champion. But that's a reference point. Clearly, we got the Mike Tyson reference, where he was knocking out everyone in a ferocious manner. But all the implications is that Moses Atama might be that big thing. And I know a lot of people disagree with this. A lot of people want to throw him in with Usyk, but I would like to see him in with a few people. And off the top of my head, I think the Cabell fight is a good fight, because Cabell brings a lot to the table. He's got a good CV. He beat Zhilei Zhang, retired Zhilei Zhang, so he would be a good fight. I think Martin Bakole is underrated. If you look at Martin Bakole's, not his performance against Joseph Parker, because there's a variable of having a 24-hour camp, and that is a massive variable. If you look at his performance against Jared Anderson, if Martin Bakole can go back to that performance, then he would give anyone a hard time, and that could be a sensational fight. Clearly the Joseph Parker fight would be a very good fight. And I think those three fights could, they could, they would be big fights, and they would be potentially massive tests for Moses Atama. And I think that I feel like he should keep going on that trajectory, keep fighting better fighters, but there's obviously levels. It's like, if you've got bosses, you've got Usyk as like the final boss. Some people think he should go straight to the final boss. No, I think he should, start fighting people in the top 10 and then progress to that final boss.